Hi. I want to talk about Yates's early poetry. For our class, I've assigned The Lake Isle of Innisfree, Who Goes with Fergus, and Song of the Wandering Aengus. And I've chosen these because they're beautiful and famous and representative of the early phase of Yates's poems. And so these are exemplary of what we mean when we talk about Irish literary revival. Um, each of them either um, reaches nostalgically to the past or addresses the issue of past itself. Lake Isle of Innisfree in a particular way does that, or is using ancient Irish mythology and folk figures as a kind of anchor for what become the beautiful meditations of the poem. So, why don't we go ahead and start looking at these? Now, it's not my object to explicate the poems in this format. I'd rather save that for class. And so my aspiration for our class session is that we will close read together, and I'll pick two or three of our poems, and that will be our focus. So my job right now, my desire right now, is to give you an overview and a sort of foothold. So if you take a look at Lake Isle of Innisfree, I'm going to go ahead and read it through just because it's a fun thing to do, and because I can pause and point out certain things. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honeybees, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There, midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always, night and day, I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or the pavement's gray. I hear it in the deep heart's core. It's a very beautiful poem to listen to. We can see that in the simplest of words, the pattern of sounds that Yates creates reverberate it reverberates sonorously, onomatopoetically. We're hearing those bees in the bee loud glade. And what we are chiefly experiencing is a kind of reverie from someone in presumably an urban space. And the biographical note for this poem is that it came to Yates while he was on a trip in London. But it's also a fantasy of the far west of Ireland. Innisfree is a place not far from Sligo, and it's a lake, is a little island there. And Yates spent so much time in the Sligo area and did so much of his writing there. And it becomes this imaginative landscape and point of imaginary origins, which was the title I gave last week for Juno and the Paycock. Because, like last week, this week we're in the middle of the notion of the construction of Irish identity and what it means. And so one of the things Yates is offering us here is saying, maybe it exists in this space of nostalgia. Maybe it exists in a kind of almost never land of images and impossibilities. There moonlights all a glimmer and noon a purple glow. A good example of exactly that. So we'll come back to this, and this may be one of the poems that we explicate together because there's many riches to mine. But as you read it, think about its structure. Think about how it's given to us in 3 stanzas. Think about where lines break. Think about the sound of words. And think about the images, because there are images here. There's images of birds, of bees, and other creatures, of the water that laps. And when water laps, of course, it makes sort of a concentric series of rings. These are images that will return in Yates's work. So it's a good place for us to begin. Also in this early poetry is the, let me get it here for you, Who Goes with Fergus? And this is another absolutely lovely poem. In this poem, Yates is very specifically referencing Irish mythology. And the poem is short enough that we can look at it, together. I can even read it right now. But essentially, it's another escape poem. It's another construction of a long, long time ago, of a creation of maybe of an archaic space, of a forgotten reality. In this instance, I would say a use of time, and I would characterize it as mythic time. Who will go drive with Fergus now and pierce the deep wood's woven shade and dance upon the level shore? Young man, lift up your prow and lift your tender eyelids, maid, and brood on hopes and fear no more. And no more turn aside and brood upon love's bitter mystery. For Fergus rules the brazen cars and rules the shadows of the wood and the white breast of the dim sea and all disheveled wandering stars. And so, again, the reaching for the elemental, love, young men, young women, the woods, the glade, a figure from ancient Irish lore, trees, the wood, water, just as we had it in Innisfree, and the echo and cadence of the language, the tone of melancholy, the sense of something having been irreparably perhaps lost, that gives it that tone. These are all characteristics of especially these earlier poems, but certainly will carry through to the later ones that we're going to read. Let's take a look at Song of Wandering Aengus as well. And I won't read that one out. It's a little bit longer, but I encourage you to read it out loud. That's a really good practice when you're working on poetry. And in this poem, I think what we start to get a glimpse of is, this is a poem that Yates, quite frankly, wrote about his infatuation with Maud Gonne. And so there's myth and folklore woven in about figures of women who can vanish and reappear. And it begins in a wood. I went out to the hazel wood. Okay. I'll read the first few ones. I went out to the hazel wood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand, and hooked a berry to a thread. And when the white moths were out on wing, and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a little stream, and I caught a little trout. And so there again, we have the woods. We have a specific kind of wood. We have a wand, which is a kind of stick. Moths, things on wing. You might notice in this, as well as the other poems, Yeats's preference for simple monosyllabic words. Again, it's that elemental. And it's that instinct, too, that if we can name things, then they come into existence. And words being almost magical in their properties, almost incantatory. And each of these early poems possesses that sound. There's a bewitchment about them. And at the end of this poem, a kind of magic has been cast. And it's about moths and silver and glimmering, and the glimmering girl who emerges from the fish. And it closes with the beautiful lines. Though I am old and wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, nobody gets away with repetition like Yates. Watch for it. It just happens. We can't do it. Somehow it doesn't work, whether we're trying to write poetry or prose or a paper for somebody, but Yates can do it. I will find out where she has gone and kiss her lips and take her hands and walk among long dappled grass and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. And again, more elemental things, the sun, the moon, time. The sun being round like an apple, the moon being round like a silver apple. Basic elemental images. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and we can revisit these together.